The history of the American frontier has been systematically sanitized, transformed over generations into an idealized, cinematic tapestry of heroic lawmen, noble pioneers, and the inevitable march of manifest destiny. But beneath the romanticized dust of the Old West lies a far more terrifying, unvarnished reality. It was a bleak landscape forged in corporate espionage, state-sanctioned violence, bizarre localized anomalies, and absolute human depravity. What you are about to uncover are the deeply unsettling, thoroughly documented historical truths that the history books deliberately chose to erase from the collective consciousness. Prepare to enter the dark, hidden underbelly of the frontier.
Welcome to Living History Channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one.
We begin not with a lone outlaw hiding out in the Badlands, but with a corporate shadow that terrorized the American frontier from coast to coast. In 1850, Alan Pinkerton established a private detective agency that quickly evolved into the brutal, de facto paramilitary enforcement arm of ruthless industrial tycoons and anxious politicians. Long before the federal government laid claim to modern forensic investigative techniques, the Pinkertons were pioneering psychological criminal profiling, maintaining highly systematic portrait mugshot databases, and tracking early biometric markers like fingerprints. They relentlessly hunted down the legendary Jesse James and his infamous James Younger gang, hounding them so mercilessly into the deepest recesses of the criminal underground that the gang was ultimately destroyed by the sheer weight of paranoia. Yet, the Pinkertons' methods were frequently far heavier, bloodier, and more corrupt than the crimes they sought to prevent. Operating as an extrajudicial mercenary force, they served capital over conscience, staging extrajudicial raids and executing suspects without trial. This was the dark dawn of corporate surveillance in America, establishing a grim precedent where justice was merely a commodity bought by the highest bidder. In the biting winter of 1874, the unforgiving, frost-locked peaks of the Colorado Rockies became the stage for an unimaginable psychological horror that tested the absolute limits of human survival. A guide named Alfred Packer led 5 eager prospectors into the freezing wilderness in search of a legendary gold vein. Months later, as the snows began to thaw, Packer emerged from the mountain passes entirely alone, oddly well-nourished, and noticeably evasive during questioning. When suspicious local authorities finally located the remains of his party near Lake City, forensic examinations revealed a scene of pure, unadulterated butchery. The bodies had been systematically mutilated, their bones cracked open, and their flesh stripped away with meticulous culinary care. Packer desperately maintained that he had acted solely in self-defense after a companion went mad, claiming he was forced to consume the remains to survive the suffocating mountain freeze. The jury utterly rejected his desperate pleas, branding him the Colorado cannibal. This harrowing episode remains a grim historical testament to the absolute frailty of human morality when stripped of civilization and confronted with the primal terror of starvation. The idealized image of the cinematic train heist, immortalized in countless Western films, was actually birthed in a flash of raw, calculating violence on a dark night in 1866. John and Simeon Reno engineered the first major moving train robbery in American history, targeting an isolated Ohio and Mississippi railway convoy. Stealing over $13,000, a staggering fortune at the time, capable of purchasing entire town plots, they exposed a catastrophic structural vulnerability in the nation's rapidly expanding transportation infrastructure. They did not just steal capital, they established a lethal, highly efficient operational blueprint. Infamous outlaws like Jesse James and the Wild Bunch meticulously studied the Reno brothers' methods, analyzing complex railroad timetables, mapping guard rotations, and mastering the art of the sudden, overwhelming track ambush. This single, lawless act transformed the iron veins of American economic progress into high-risk hunting grounds for desperate men, fundamentally shifting the balance of power between the state and the criminal underworld. Born into the crushing shackles of chattel slavery, Bass Reeves escaped during the chaotic violence of the American Civil War, seeking sanctuary in the unforgiving, lawless Indian territory of modern-day Oklahoma. There, he mastered multiple indigenous languages, adapted to brutal survival conditions, and forged deep bonds with the native tribes who shielded him from slave catchers. When the conflict concluded, his unmatched tracking skills and peerless marksmanship caught the attention of federal authorities, leading to his appointment as the very first Black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi River. Working under the fierce, uncompromising jurisdiction of Judge Isaac Parker, famously known as the Hanging Judge, Reeves arrested more than 3,000 desperate outlaws over a legendary 32-year career, personally eliminating 14 of the most feared killers of the frontier in self-defense. Though popular American culture would later completely sanitize his immense legacy to inspire the whitewashed, fictional persona of the Lone Ranger, the unvarnished historical record reveals a black lawman who stood as the ultimate, unyielding wall against Western anarchy. William H. Bonney, immortalized across the globe as Billy the Kid, was reportedly gunned down in the dark of night in 1881 by Sheriff Pat Garrett at Fort Sumner. At just 21 years old, his violent life was abruptly cut short, yet his myth refused to stay buried. Rumors immediately rippled across the frontier that Garrett had killed the wrong man, enabling Billy to slip into a quiet, lifelong anonymity. This psychological unease manifested physically at his burial site. His headstone became a magnet for obsessed relic hunters and vengeful citizens, being stolen and desecrated twice over the decades. Today, the monument sits trapped behind thick, industrial iron chains and a cage of reinforced concrete. It is a striking historical paradox. Even in death, the memory of the West's most restless outlaw must remain permanently imprisoned to prevent the living from stealing his ghost. The ultimate destruction of the legendary open-range cowboy came not from a bullet, but from a cataclysmic meteorological nightmare known as the Great Die-Up. In the bitter winter months of 1886 and 1887, unprecedented, razor-sharp blizzards swept across the Great Plains, trapping unsuspecting ranchers and millions of free-roaming cattle. Within days, the landscape turned into a frozen, monolithic graveyard. Fences became death traps where hundreds of thousands of cattle piled up, freezing alive where they stood. Ranchers went bankrupt overnight, their entire fortunes erased by the blinding ice. This climate catastrophe completely shattered the old economic model of the West, forcing the implementation of enclosed winter management, artificial feed, and the definitive death of the boundless, untamed frontier. In April of 1890, deep within the desert wilderness surrounding Tombstone, Arizona, two seasoned hunters claimed to have encountered and killed a monstrous, impossibly large winged creature resembling a prehistoric pterodactyl or a mythic thunderbird. The local newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph, published a detailed account of the event, asserting that a photograph had been captured showing the colossal creature stretched across the side of a prominent barn. Yet that photograph has completely vanished from the historical record. Decades of intensive archival searches have yielded nothing but empty space. Speculation abounds. Was it a mass hallucination, an early cryptozoological cover-up, or a brilliantly executed media hoax designed to sell newspapers to an isolated populace? The missing artifact remains one of the frontier's most tantalizing, unanswerable mysteries. For nearly 30 arduous years, one of the most respected iron-willed stagecoach drivers in the treacherous territories of California was a tobacco-chewing, fierce individual known across the state as Charlie Parkhurst. Driving massive teams of horses through torrential rains, washing mudslides, and lethal bandit ambushes, Charlie's legendary courage was unquestioned. During one infamous robbery attempt, Parkhurst maintained a steady hand on the reins while returning lethal fire, utterly routing the outlaws. It was only upon Charlie's death in 1879 that a stunning medical truth was uncovered. Charlie was biologically a woman named Charlotte. She had completely assumed a male identity to escape the oppressive, suffocating gender restrictions of the 19th century. Parkhurst even managed to vote in a presidential election decades before women's suffrage was legally recognized, executing the ultimate deception against a deeply patriarchal society. The sanitized myth of Western justice completely disintegrates when examining the harrowing events of the 1892 Johnson County War in Wyoming. This was not a clash of honorable men. It was a brutal, systematic corporate invasion. A powerful cabal of wealthy cattle barons, backed by political elite, unilaterally branded independent small-time ranchers as rustlers. Rather than utilizing the legal system, these oligarchs hired a private army of 23 ruthless Texas gunmen, providing them with a literal hit list of local citizens. Homes were burned to the ground, small property owners were summarily executed in cold blood, and terror paralyzed the territory until the federal government was forced to intervene with military troops. It serves as a stark, chilling historical warning of what occurs when unregulated wealth dictates the law and weaponizes private violence against the working class. Crawford Goldsby, known by the terrifying moniker Cherokee Bill, was born in 1876 to a multiracial lineage of African American, European, and Cherokee ancestry. By the fragile age of 18, he had descended into a breathtakingly violent life of cold-blooded murder and relentless train robberies across the Indian Territory. Hunted like a wild animal by a small army of federal marshals, his name filled frontier newspapers with dread. When he was finally cornered and condemned to death by hanging at the age of 20, his chilling psychological detachment remained completely unbroken. Standing atop the wooden gallows, when asked if he had any final words of repentance, he sneered at the executioner, coldly stating, "I came here to die, not to make a speech. Hurry up." His brief, bloody existence perfectly mirrored the violent fractures of a frontier tearing itself apart at the seams. The monumental completion of the Transcontinental Railroad is frequently celebrated as a triumph of American ingenuity, but its iron tracks were laid upon a forgotten foundation of immigrant bone and blood. In the wake of the California Gold Rush, thousands of Chinese laborers arrived, facing vicious institutional prejudice and lethal working conditions. Men like Li Wang worked grueling 14-hour shifts, living in fragile canvas tents amidst freezing mountain winters, while manually detonating volatile nitroglycerin to blast through solid granite walls. In several key sections of the Central Pacific Railroad, Chinese immigrants constituted over 90% of the entire workforce. Yet their staggering sacrifices were met with venomous hostility, culminating in the xenophobic Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This legislative cruelty permanently shut America's doors, ripping families apart and burying the monumental contributions of Asian pioneers beneath a thick layer of historical amnesia. Booming into existence during the chaotic gold rush of the late 1870s, Bodie, California quickly developed a reputation as a lawless, sin-drenched metropolis packed with volatile saloons, overflowing brothels, and desperate miners. But when the gold veins inevitably dried up, the population vanished into thin air, leaving an entire city frozen in a state of eerie, arrested decay. Today, it stands as a preserved ghost town, where dusty storefronts and creaking doors whisper secrets to the desert wind. But a dark folklore protects these ruins. For generations, visitors who have dared to steal even the smallest artifact, a rusted nail, a weathered bottle, or a smooth pebble, report being systematically targeted by a relentless, ruinous streak of bad luck and unexplained tragedy. The curse of Bodie remains an active psychological ward, ensuring the remnants of the dead remain completely undisturbed by the greed of the living. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley Reed, the woman who would become known as Belle Starr rejected the genteel expectations of her wealthy upbringing to become the undisputed outlaw queen of the frontier. Operating deep within the lawless Indian Territory, alongside notorious figures like the James Younger Gang, she masterminded sophisticated horse theft rings and bootlegging operations. Belle was a brilliant psychological manipulator of the media. She wore elegant black velvet gowns while riding side saddle, yet carried dual Colt revolvers and possessed a lethal hair-trigger temper. In 1889, at the age of 40, her criminal reign was abruptly ended by an assassin's shotgun blast to her back. The true identity of her killer remains lost to history, but the profound silence surrounding her execution only served to eternalize her status as a cultural icon of absolute, unyielding defiance. In 1895, a towering 60-year-old woman named Mary Fields shattered every societal barrier in existence by becoming the first black female postal courier in United States history. Known across the dangerous terrain of Montana as Stagecoach Mary, she possessed a reputation for absolute invincibility. Standing 6 feet tall, chewing heavy cigars, and carrying a Winchester rifle slung casually over her shoulder, Mary braved lethal wolf packs, treacherous mountain passes, and armed bandits to ensure the mail was delivered. When the snowdrifts became too deep for her horses, she would strap the heavy mail sacks to her own back and walk for miles through sub-zero blizzards. In an era explicitly designed to crush both her race and her gender, Mary commanded absolute universal respect through sheer, unadulterated physical force and iron discipline. The true battlefields of the Old West were not always dusty trails. Often, they were the smoke-choked, liquor-soaked tables of the frontier saloons. Here, master swindlers like Canada Bill Jones ran highly sophisticated confidence schemes that stripped seasoned pioneers of their life savings in mere minutes. Jones possessed an unassuming, almost foolish smile that intentionally disarmed his victims, luring them into rigged games of three-card Monte. He operated under a famously cynical, twisted moral code, once dryly remarking that it was a moral duty to separate a fool from his money before an outright criminal could do it. These saloons were psychological hunting grounds where legendary figures like Doc Holliday, a deadly gunslinger who was also a practicing dentist, gambled with their lives, proving that a quick wit and a deceptive hand were far more valuable than the fastest gun. In the year 1872, two brilliant conmen named Philip Arnold and John Slack executed a financial deception that brought the nation's wealthiest banking elites completely to their knees. They claimed to have discovered a secret, astronomically wealthy gem field hidden deep within the remote wilderness of Colorado. To legitimize their staggering claim, they executed a deceptively simple tactic. They purchased industrial quantities of uncut diamonds and rubies from European markets and literally salted the barren earth. When prominent tycoons, politicians, and inspectors conducted site visits, they discovered precious gems glinting on the bare surface, completely blinding them with greed. Millions of dollars changed hands in an instant. It took the brilliant, meticulous analysis of geologist Clarence King to dismantle the illusion, revealing that the stones bore microscopic manufacturing cuts completely inconsistent with natural deposits. It stands as a profound testament to how easily the promise of effortless wealth can completely paralyze human reason. The final, dark, bizarre custom of this untamed era lay in the practice of armed mourning. Many of the West's most pathological outlaws explicitly demanded to be buried alongside the very instruments that defined their violent earthly existence. fully loaded revolvers, pristine decks of gambling cards, and unopened bottles of whiskey. They operated under a grim, superstitious conviction that these objects would serve them in a lawless afterlife or preserve their terrifying reputations long after the final shot was fired. Over time, the isolated cemeteries housing these infamous names became targets for obsessed cultists and relic hunters, leading to rampant grave desecration. Local folklore insisted that those who touched these stolen holsters could feel a residual, malevolent presence. These haunted graveyards, scattered across the desolate plains, serve as the ultimate physical manifestation of an era that refused to let go of its violence, embedding its sins directly into the soil. The true history of the American frontier is not a sanitized myth of heroic progress, but a haunting mirror reflecting the darkest, most resilient depths of human nature. It was an era where the boundary between survival and absolute savagery remained razor thin, and where human morality was continuously traded for gold, power, and blood. If you possess the rare courage required to unearth the dark, unvarnished realities of our collective past, rather than accepting comfortable historical fabrications, ensure you subscribe to this channel immediately. Turn on your notifications, because the deepest, most terrifying secrets of our history are still waiting silently in the shadows, and our journey into the dark has only just begun.
If there's a forgotten era or photo you want me to bring to life, drop it in the comments. I'm listening.